everybody. We hope that you can see and hear us. It's the 20th episode of Ed Video's Open Circuit. We're back. It's May 4th, 2020. I am Scott from Ed Video, and this is Edie, the co-producer and co-host of this show here that we do from our secret location at 404 York Road, Guelph, Ontario, Canada. We're very excited to be back. Hope everyone had a great weekend. And if depending on where you're watching from the world, we're hoping that the weather is getting better for you. It's certainly getting nicer every day where we are here in Guelph. Very excited to talk to our guest today, a dear friend of mine, artist I've worked with a few times. Juliane Foronda is waiting to talk to us from where she is. But before we get into talking with Julie about her work from her career, as we do here, when Edie's around, we like to do something that we call Edie's Video Game Review. And today, Edie, what do you have for us? Let's take a look. Edie's got something here on her iPad.
It's called Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, and it's pretty much a game that's like Harry Potter, except it's like you're in Hogwarts. It's really fun. You can go to like classes like potions and charms, and then you can actually like fight people like a duel. And so you go into here, and then you can defensive beats aggressive beats sneaky, and sneaky beats defensive.
Oh, it's a vicious cycle. So this is
And then when you win, you can choose something to do.
Okay.
And then on the lines up there, when you get something, they get out. So then they just won. So they did that Expelliarmus on me. And then I'm gonna do.
So this is an adventure game, like the book.
Yeah.
Right, the books.
There's a storyline to it too.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if everyone has the same one or not, because I can't play theirs. But.
So you are playing with real other people?
Yeah.
But it's anonymous.
But you can't talk or anything.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Wow. So what do you like the most about this game?
That it's Harry Potter.
Ah, you're a big fan, aren't you? A big Harry Potter fan.
I finished the series like a few weeks ago, and then now I started reading it again, and I'm already on the 3rd book.
Wow. And now you're playing this. This is an app that you can download. It's free.
It's free.
Do they try to make you buy stuff?
Well, there's a store you can buy stuff, but you don't need to or anything.
Ah, okay. Well, that's exciting, and you're pretty good at this game, I guess. Yeah. Awesome.
Also, you can change your appearance, like there.
Oh, yeah. You can modify anything. And sorry, what's this app called again?
It's called Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery.
Okay. And you can get this at the App Store.
Yes.
And what would you rate this out of, say, 5?
4 and 7/8.
4 and 7/8. Well, I didn't realize we measure the 5 out of inches, but 4 and 7/8. Sure, why not? That's a perfectly good rating. Well, awesome. Well, thanks very much, Edie, for showing us this app. All right. So let's take a look. As we do, before we talk to our guest, Julie, we are going to just also talk about what's coming up here on Open Circuit. Let's take a look. Tomorrow we have somewhat local artist Dustin Seabrook, who has a great history of doing music and video stuff in Guelph. And then we're going to talk about talk on the next about his Project Isolation video series. And then the next day we have Guelph artist Corey Steckel, who's going to speak to us about what he's been up to, and in particular his very massive body of collage work that he's been making over the last several years. And then just so you know, we are going to change up the format of Open Circuit. We were doing every weekday at 2 p.m., which sounded like an amazing idea at first, but it ended up being just a ridiculous amount of work, actually, and it took a lot of focus. So just to kind of ease off on it, we're going to do Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Okay, so that's going to be our new format starting next week. We'll have a lot of new guests ready to speak to. All right, so now I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, someone I've known for, I'd say, almost about 10 years now. This is Julie Foronda. Let me just read this quickly. Is a Filipino-Canadian artist, organizer, and writer whose practice responds to structures in our public and private lives. Working predominantly in sculpture, object intervention, and text, her work references architecture, built environments, furniture, hospitality, care, and intimacy, often attempting to better understand their limits and their absurdities. So I'm very excited to spend the next 45 minutes or so speaking to Julie about all of these things. Let's see if we can find her on the video phone. Let's take a look. I think that's her. Julie, can you see me and hear me?
I can see and hear you, Scott and Edie.
We can see and hear you too. Well, thank you so much, very much, for taking the time to speak with us today. We've worked a lot together, but I'm quite curious preparing this to know more about your work. So before we get going talking about that, though, let's tell our viewers where you are and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm in Glasgow in Scotland right now. I've been here for about a year now, kind of on and off, and mostly just doing research, doing art, doing everything and also nothing, I guess, right now. Yeah.
But you're doing okay. You're in a good place, feeling safe, all things considered.
Yeah, it's not so bad in Glasgow now, so it's fine. I think sometimes you just get a bit cabin feverish, but it's really not so bad here, so it's okay overall. Yeah, just more waiting it out, I guess.
Yes, like so many people. Before we get into sort of the overview of your career, and then we'll get into more specific parts of your recent work, I always ask the guests, what are your really early experiences or memories about art or creative things, or is there something that that you can recall as a pivotal moment, a little light going on, saying maybe this is a thing for me?
I really wasn't the best student in high school, and I skipped most of high school, I think. I skipped a lot of school, but art was the only class I never skipped, or I would actually go to a lot. I went to an alternative school, so I kind of got to make my own schedule a lot of the time, and it was just the only thing I really kept going back to or would actually be interested in learning about, or I would always try to make all my other assignments kind of related to it in some way, so it just kind of, I guess, happened naturally that way, but I guess that would be mostly it.
Mm-hmm.
It's early.
And
early stuff.
You grew up in Toronto? Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah.
And then you went to the University of Guelph, where we're at right now, to do your undergrad. What maybe pushed you into going to Guelph?
I don't really know actually how I ended up there, but I'm really thankful I did. I just applied to a few. I heard a few really good things about the program for art there, and I think at the time I just wasn't quite sure if I wanted to do art as a future career, or do something in the art world, do art therapy or design or something. So it just kind of made sense. It wasn't OCAD. I didn't want to be in Toronto. I didn't want to be in a bigger city or something like that. It seemed close enough to home but far enough from home. Seemed like a really good city, so it just kind of made sense from there, and then I kind of grew to love it very quickly. So
That's so funny because it's the exact opposite of me growing up near Guelph in a little town called Elmira. I couldn't wait to get to OCAD in downtown Toronto as the, I guess, polar opposite of what I
Yeah.
grew up with. So maybe there's a logic there for both of us in reverse. So what was it like at U of G? What are your recollections or how do you think maybe it potentially like guided you into sort of what you became as an artist?
I think it really instilled in me a sense of community and like support, and a big sense of safety. I think I had really amazing professors, who have now become mentors and good friends of mine. Um, and it also kind of changed the trajectory of everything. Like I was saying, I didn't really know what, like how art in what capacity art would have in my life, going into school. And I think just being there, it was really made to be a possibility for me. I got internships through the help of professors, and then those kind of became jobs after. So just yeah, it kind of let it be a reality for me to be an artist from going to Guelph.
And I guess it you enjoyed the experience enough, I suppose, to decide to pursue your master's degree. I remember one day you emailed me and asked for a reference letter, and I said for sure. And when you told me you were planning to go to Iceland, I was like, okay, for sure, let's try to get you to Iceland, and you did it. So tell us a little bit about your decision to do that and why Iceland, and how did that how was that for you?
It was a weird mix. Like I didn't think much of it. I had a feeling I was ready to do a master's program. I didn't want to wait another year. I saw that the application for Iceland was still open, so I filled it out. I had been there once traveling, and I liked it enough to think I could live there for 2 years. So I got a hold of you, and I got a hold of a couple other people, and I just wrote that application and somehow got myself there. So yeah, so it's been a few years now since graduating from there. So it's been a while now.
And in one sense, I think you got there at a strange time after their, economic meltdown 12 years ago, whenever that was. And then this kind of rapid rebuilding in this new form of the country as this like hyper tourism, sort of Las Vegas model, like get here cheap and then like open your wallets. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, how
like
did that
breathing will cost you there.
yeah, like how did that must have been a weird time of upheaval and strangeness for not just you going in from outside, but like for Icelandic people to try to figure out this. How do you think that strangeness of that time might have influenced what you were doing or the entire contemporary art community?
I think, well, I mean, like how you're saying the flights were so cheap, it was great in the master's program because, um, the academy in Iceland is the only art school in the country. So kind of anyone studying art is studying art there. So whenever, anyone from North America or Europe was flying to one place or another, Iceland was such a natural stop. So we got some really amazing and interesting guests coming through because of that. Um, but I think the influx of tourism also just made it really a strange time to be a visible minority in Iceland, and I think that was like one of my biggest hurdles there. But otherwise, I think it was actually quite an interesting time to be there because like so many people were coming through, and I think compared to Guelph, where we still had a lot of interesting people coming through because it was close to Toronto, I just think like the amount of people coming in was just insane, and even just through residencies and people visiting, it was just really nice to have so many, people coming into such a small community. I found that really interesting.
Well, I guess a lot of people need to go to be inspired by the beautiful landscapes. So why not
Yeah.
go? So then I guess from Iceland, and you're quite involved with the university or the gallery that it was like a student
Mhm.
gallery you're working with. But then, I mean, I know we're skipping a few things, but off to another nearby island in the North Atlantic, where you are now. Tell us a little bit about where you are and I guess how you got there.
Well, yes, like one of the good things about Iceland is that since it's in Europe, Erasmus was a possibility, so that kind of allowed me to travel quite a bit and get a bit of funding for that. So I did, um, in the summer between my masters, I did an internship at Hospital Field in Arbroath, and that was just one of the most amazing experiences ever. And then just after graduating, I was in Spain for a little bit working at a residency there. And then the last part of my grant I used to do research at the Women's Library here in Glasgow. So that kind of is what drew me here. And it's one of the most amazing and special and unique places I've been. So I've just been working really closely with them for the past year and doing my own research, but also doing some programming alongside them. And one of the curators there. So that's kind of what drew me to Glasgow specifically. But I think I've always just been trying to find an excuse to move here or be here longer. So I found it.
Well, I'm glad it's working out for you, and you're enjoying it and finding a community there as well. Let's get into your work a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my main impressions about your work is that you really like fluid between mediums, and not just that, but like you really how do you say it? You really consider your mediums and what kind of what they mean. A few weeks ago, I talked to this video artist, Tasman Richardson, and he's the same, but in video. Not only is he making videos, but they're very much like about what video is. And I find like all of your work is that too. It's like really aware of its materiality. You use it as like a medium within itself, no matter what it is. But before we talk about sort of objects like that, I want to talk about something, I guess, a little more ethereal, is your video work. And that's just some of the work that we showed together in exhibitions. And some of the first work I saw of yours when I met you. I'm gonna just play some of these videos while we chat about them. There's 3 in this series that called the Accumulation series. The first one that we're just going to take a look at right now is Accumulation 1, after Rube Goldberg, I think it was called. Tell us a little bit about this idea to make this style of stop motion animation.
Yeah, well, I think it just came quite naturally. I was working, the specific one was made in Guelph. Actually, it was the last piece I made in Guelph, and it was my first video I ever made. And I was just kind of collecting all the junk in my studio and piling it up and photographing it and trying to catalog it in some way. And then this kind of bridge-like structure kind of started to happen just from me playing around. So then I just started doing that a little bit more, and then it kind of by accident became a stop motion thing. And then when I realized it was quite interesting, I tried to do it better. And I'm still not the best at videos, so I got a lot of help from Nathan and Guelph and some other video people, and that kind of came across that way. But essentially, it's just me filming things that exist in the space or in proximity to the space in a bridge-like way, and then it's just kind of trying to reach a goal that's kind of pointless in many ways, but also quite satisfying. So to me, that's enough of a point, I guess, to make a video. So yes, it's essentially just making bridges from one side to another, or from one spot to another. And then this was just done in different places. So one with OCAD after this, and then the other one was in Greece when we did that together.
Okay, we're just taking a look at number 2. It's a library at OCAD. One thing I love about it is how it's sort of like a little puzzle that's being revealed, where you're like you can see sometimes where you're removing the objects from the shelf or whatever to reconfigure them. And the other part I think is so charming is that you don't edit out like the failures in it. Like it is what it is. What kind of rules, I guess, would you set up in your mind as your own rules about how to make these?
I think it's I guess as much as it's a video, it's me documenting a process of building. So I think in a lot of building, there's also failure and trying again, and just seeing what will happen. And I think even in some of them, I'll try one way and then it doesn't work a couple times, and then I'll put a new object to make it a bit more structurally sound. So I think I was just trying to be as honest as I could with it, and I didn't want anything really glamorous. I just wanted it to work. So I think it was just kind of at certain points, it was just getting it to work. And I think that's kind of how I think about a lot of my work, actually. So I think it's just it's quite an interesting way to kind of see my mind as a video, kind of see how things are built and how things kind of progress over time. Yeah.
Well, I want to get into soon about talking about, these I think to me sort of embody some of your thinking about objects as having their own sort of life forms. Let's take a look at the last one that you made when we were in Athens on the marble floor of the judo arena.
Yeah.
Um, I guess how would you think about making them sort of in a very site-specific way, or like what are your recollections of making doing this animation sort of on the floor right before the fair started?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it in quite an interesting way. I think mostly I do it just as a way to allow other people to see how I see, um, to see that these things can exist in a different way than we might understand them, or that they can be in different configurations than what might be understood or normal. So, kind of if you see a bottle cap, it could actually be part of the bridge, or it could be something like that. So, I found it quite important to do them in situ and to do them in a way that um, I think people tend to grow an affection towards them, and kind of to understand them more spatially than they would, or to understand scale in a different way, um, or objects in comparison to certain spaces. And that scale, I think, is quite interesting to consider. And that's all stuff I tend to consider in my work. So I think it's maybe just kind of my way to show people.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is there's sort of a narrative in there, and you're sort of rooting for the objects to do what you're trying to do, but really you're like rooting for the artist to like accomplish this thing, and it gets like kind of tense, to be honest. It's like, oh, I don't know, like that thing might collapse, or that's just not going to
Yeah.
work, and you see you're rethinking on them. Um, let's talk a little bit more just about like your video work overall. I mean, it's not like I'd say if there's anything, in my opinion, if anything is like the center of your practice, it's sculpture. These videos are like sculpture. But let's take a look at. Oh, maybe I don't have it. Oh, I didn't. I forgot to put it. I am so sorry. I forgot to put it there. But your other video that you can find from your website, it's called Formations, and it's like a different style. Can you tell us about how you made that or thought of it with the? It's like about laying paper over time and
Hmm.
recording it. What was the process behind that?
Yeah. So that one, it happened at the Roundtable Residency. So that's a residency in Toronto run by Toronto-based artists, and it's usually for more emerging artists. And I think my year, it was the year where there were maybe like 30 or 40 artists in this old Toronto mansion at like Bloor Young or something like that. And it's also an alternative school. I think it's a middle school and high school or something like that. And my residency studio space happened to be the art room, and I just saw all of these kind of edges of construction paper that were faded, and it just felt really nostalgic and familiar. So I kind of started fading construction paper myself and taping it onto the windows in my studio and layering them with each other, kind of creating these forms, and I didn't know what was going to happen with that. And then I just started scanning them just so I could kind of archive them in some way and see them, just because they kept fading. And as I started to kind of organize them by color, I just saw all of these shapes happening between the shapes, and I thought that was quite interesting. So then it kind of just became a slideshow. I think it's about 10 minutes or so, of kind of just going through all the colors and the shapes. So like seeing them shift over time, and sometimes you miss when something changes. Sometimes it's really obvious. Uh, and yeah, and I think it was just again my process, almost in a more linear way than it typically is. Uh, in that way, yeah.
Well, it has like there's a sense of restraint in it, I guess, that a lot of people are struggle with. I feel like artists or filmmakers, anyone, when they're making something, whereas the standard is like everything's over the top. So that's what people often aspire to. But when video is made in a very restrained way, I feel like it's extremely radical for people. And I feel like this restraint, this subtlety, is sort of a thing that runs through a lot of your work. It's more like quiet than loud, I think, but it really works that way. I think to intrigue people, where maybe they're often used to things that are a little more like in their face. And
Mm-hmm.
let's take a look at some of your. Uh, I want to start with your sculptures, but in particular with your multiples, which I've always really
Mm-hmm.
loved. I'm going to cut to this live camera here. This is one of your sculptures here. You can kind of see what it is. It's a multiple, and this one is the plug version that's for some reason broken. Why would it be broken though? How come?
How come? Well, it's made of plaster.
It
Um,
is.
yeah.
I have another one
Yeah,
here.
that was a weird one too. That was actually made in Guelph. One of my projects, an extended three, I want to say. Um, and I think it was the walking project, maybe. Uh, and I just I find weird similarities in different materials, and I just found this like ceramic or hydrocal or these materials in plastic. I just find them so interesting and so different, and their materialities that way. So I just figured like if I could just make a plug or a switch and it kind of exists how we kind of forget them too. And I like that idea of like you kind of forget that these everyday things are just around you, but until you need to use it is when you'll likely break it. And I've always been quite fond of that kind of pathetic nature in some things, and I find them very endearing. Yeah, like I just like the idea of someone using a switch and breaking it, or using a plug and breaking it. And that was in my head for a while, so I think that's just kind of I just had to indulge my curiosity on that.
Well, I'm showing off right now the one you generously gifted me. That's the companion one. That's the light switch, and
Yeah.
I have never had the courage to install it in my home because I know inevitably this would happen, and it would be probably broken by accident, which I think maybe for as a concept is interesting, but as a piece of art I own, I'm not interested in having that happen. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so let's take a look at some of your other sculptures. This is I don't know the exact title, but the safety orange cinder block.
Oh yeah, I forgot the name of that one actually. Um, it's been a while. I think I did that one with Danica.
Oh, really? Ah.
Yeah, that was for the show, the kazoo show actually. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I thought it looked familiar, but I thought maybe I'd just seen images. Maybe I saw it IRL. And then this one is one of my favorites. It's the painted black hourglass.
Yeah,
Clever.
I
Very
do miss that one.
very clever.
Uh,
And also the slinkies in the containers as well.
the salt shakers, yeah, the slinky shakers.
Slinky shakers, of course. So when you're making multiples, how are you maybe thinking about that tradition of what you're doing as opposed to, I guess, like good old-fashioned regular sculpture that's just one-off or meant for gallery
Yeah.
presentation? How do you think about multiples?
I think multiples really, I got really interested in them through Guelph. I was really lucky as well that Dave Diamond was running his multiples class when I was there. So I really learned kind of from one of the masters in it, or one of the most well read and researched people in multiples. And I like the idea of art that you can properly live with, and not just live with on your walls, but live with and use. And I really love that tradition of a multiple, like a pin that you can wear, or artists have done shower curtains, or food even, and things like that, like these ideas of how art can actually live with you rather than beside you. And I think multiples really lend to that, and I like the idea of them being accessible. And I remember just doing trips to Art Metropole when I was a lot younger, and I think the idea of collecting art sounds so large when you're just starting out at school, but when you realize you can buy art for $2 or something, I just think that was a really important thing for me to understand, that like I didn't need to be someone of means to collect art or to own something of an artist I liked. And I really hope that I can keep feeding into that tradition, because I think it's important, and I think it's an important message for people. Um, and I also think multiples, just the idea of them are quite interesting, more so than just having one. I like the idea of them kind of spreading out and like being almost a map around the world, or wherever they're distributed or sold, or wherever that people can all experience them in different ways, but people experience them, rather than like one single sculpture or painting or drawing that only one person gets to see in its entirety. I'd rather, yeah, I'd rather share with more than share with one. It just makes sense to me for art.
Right, right. And when you do make objects, sculptures that are not multiples, when they're for gallery installations, what changes for you? I mean, I'm curious if you think about how they function while you're making them, how they function in the context of the gallery. Like if they're going to be presented in a white cube with particular lighting, to work with the space. Like how is your mind, your your mindset to approach sculptures rather than multiples, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm thinking about work being installed in a space, I think about the space as much as I think about the work, I think. Um, and I think that's always lent a lot to my work, whether it's video or sculpture, but the space is as much of a material, so it needs to be considered. So whether that's building building something to fit it specifically or building something for it. There was that piece I did at Queen's Pacific, the axis up to joint of all of the round objects I collected over time. And that's I think it's 1 by 9 meters, so it's a very narrow, tall space. And that had to fit them specifically, but then that work was also translated to show at Cambridge galleries, and we ended up using a different window, but that was just kind of shown above in an entirely different way. So I'd like to I like to think of the work more as like site aware than site specific, that it just kind of has to mold and morph to the space rather than only being able to exist in a certain space.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And
yeah.
we're going to take a look at some of your sculpture works, documentation, photos of them from exhibitions. For you, like, what I really want to get to is how do you think about objects? How do you think about materials, whether there's something you made, but maybe more specifically when they're pre-existing, like found objects. There is sort of this idea coming up, what is like the post-materialist way of thinking about it. But how are you thinking about them? I almost have a suspicion. I'm speculating here that you really think about sort of like their aura when you're using them. I mean, what is it about objects and the auras around them that's appealing to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love curious things. Um, and I think a lot of times what's curious to me is likely not curious to many people, but I see the potential in them and kind of how you said their aura. I also like to think of objects oftentimes as anonymous more than inanimate. Like very much understanding that. I mean, for example, like a cinder block is very much not living, but I don't think it's so black and white on that. I think um, that there's space for us to understand them, just like we understand um, people. Uh, and yeah, like I'm sure that's definitely like anthropomorphizing them in many ways and all of that. But I think it just doesn't need to get so complicated. I think it also helps us understand very complex things, these objects, like uh, thinking a lot about care, which was a big part of my thesis, like understanding that, um, like how certain things support how a shelf is held up, how screws function, all of these things. Like it's easier to understand complicated things through simple things. Uh, I don't know if that makes sense really, but
Yeah, I think it
uh,
does. It's a complex idea, I think, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why for you objects are important. Like I think I wonder if sort of like your experiences growing up or moving or has altered the way you might think about objects as an individual compared to other people who may not care as much about them.
mm,
I mean, I have a very complex idea where I love them, but I really, really hate them too. And like, I have this strong urge to purge everything, but then to hoard things at the same time. And I can't sometimes understand how I think about objects. But do you have any? Are they tied in with memories? Are they tied in with being nomadic or settled, or do you have any thoughts about why maybe for you particularly objects are interesting things beyond their just surface appearance?
Yeah. I mean, maybe to a degree, this whole nomadic thing of me moving a lot and everything like that. Um, I think that definitely has a tie into it. But I'm also quite good at parting with many objects, and I think actually anything that seems a bit too precious, I think has never made it directly into the work. Um, and I found that quite interesting, thinking about my work a while ago. Of anything that I've felt the need to hold on to over my many moves and travels and things like that. I just don't find important to bring into the work, but I think I'm a lot more interested in these things that people tend to overlook, and kind of understanding them as more than what what we tend to see them as, and really seeing kind of like feelings through objects. And I tend to be really attracted to things I can hold in my hand. I feel like I like to understand them in their entirety, so not just for what they are, but how they feel, how they smell, how they sit alongside other things. Yeah, I think I like things when I can understand them through more than one sense, and I think through touch, being able to really grasp something in my hand, in its entirety. I know, you can really touch many things, but I think it's quite important for me to activate multiple senses, uh, when interacting with the objects that I do.
Hmm. Well, I'm curious also, as you know, in the last 2 months, 3 months, when everything's changed, has your thoughts about objects changed? Whereas, like kind of a lot of people, most people in the world, their relationship with objects is a little different. Either suddenly everyday things became very scarce, or start taking people maybe took for granted before this, if the means they can just go have whatever they want whenever they want at a store, or have it shipped to their door within hours, and also this idea that people are sort of, for the most part, unless they're essential service workers, like sort of stuck in their home with their objects.
Mm.
Even that complexity of thinking about it is compounded for me with there's all this stuff I'd like to get rid of in my house, but I can't even bring it to the dump anymore or donate it to a
Yeah,
thrift store or anything. I'm stuck with
yeah,
my objects, and they've become a bigger influence, I suppose, in my day to day life because I'm in my house a lot more than I normally am. How about you, where you are in Glasgow? Have you thought about how has any of this thinking sort of changed as I guess humans' relationship with banal and amazing objects is sort of
yeah.
altered in the last 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, I mean, a really regular part of, I mean, in Glasgow, but elsewhere, like also in Toronto and a bit in Iceland, it was a lot of walking, like just kind of walking to understand my surroundings, but also walking to learn and to research. So I would spend a lot of time, in Glasgow in like in pound shops, Poundland, and um, charity shops and hardware stores, and kind of like looking at all of these weird things. So I think that's what I miss most is kind of the time I got to spend a lot of time with random objects, and just kind of take them in and just kind of be near them. Like I would always kind of just walk uh, into a charity shop and look around a little bit, or in a hardware shop and just look at all of the little knickknacks and everything, and then leave. And I'd do that very regularly, so that I'm quite missing. Uh, but in terms of objects in my house, I think just from moving, I've learned to be quite minimal, and I've also been thinking about, um, kind of like the ecological footprint of artists and how much we produce and purchase and use and not use, and purchase and think we're going to use and end up throwing away and stuff. So I think I have been trying to be a lot more conscious with how and why I'm making work, because I think a lot can also, like, a lot of waste can happen under the guise of art, and I don't know if that's always right. Um, so I have been thinking that a lot, and I think also being in Iceland, where there was almost no like dollar stores or anything like that, and a lot less kind of junk shops. I had to rethink a lot and kind of reevaluate what was important, and was it these like weird random objects, or was it their materiality and the materials themselves. So I kind of fell more into working with wood again there. Um, so yeah, I guess being here now, I guess my day to day hasn't changed other than getting to like sit beside junk in random shops, which is maybe for the better. But yeah, I think it hasn't actually changed as much as I thought it would.
Well, let's take a look at, I think, what is your most recent or one of your very most recent projects. I don't really know much about this one. I'd love for you to describe your ideas around this. I just have some images to show, and we're seeing flowers here and buttons. And what tell us about this project, Julie, and what's going on with it?
Yeah, so this one, it happened alongside the Women's Library. So I did a show there in November, and it was kind of in response to 6 or 7 months of research. It was curated by Caroline Gosden, and it also included Kirsty Russell and Taco Tal, who are local artists in Scotland. And the whole show was around feminist hospitality, which was actually the majority of my research at the Women's Library was on feminist hospitality, and considering the different ways that we can host or be hosted, and what hosting really means, and also thinking not just about um, hosting as a perceived positive thing, but also this kind of a hostage related to hosting and stuff. So it was also kind of like the dangers and the violence in hosting that was quite interesting to all of us. But the pins themselves, they're flowers, wild or fallen, mostly from around Glasgow in Scotland, that I picked over the summer. So I realized that there were 94 days in summer, so it's an addition of 94, kind of one pin to symbolize each day. And then I was thinking a lot about preserving too, probably also from working in an archive for 6+ months. But I was just quite interested in this notion of unpacking the word preserve and seeing pressure in there a lot in press, and thinking about kind of the relationship of all of that. So I just started to press flowers in books, and I wasn't really knowing what I was going to do with them. I wasn't sure if it was just going to be a pile of flowers or something. But then at the Women's Library, they wear these badges, pins that have any staff or volunteer name there, and it just seems so fitting to kind of press flowers into badges, and with this like really beautiful old button press that I got to use there. So I just did an edition of the 94, and then they were put in a glass case for each day, just in a grid, so you could see all 94 together. I think it was just kind of this thought, like thinking a lot about pressure and preserving and what it actually means to preserve.
Mm.
Which is what I'm thinking about a lot now. Like, what does archiving or keeping or like any of these things, like what do they actually mean, and how do we do them, and why do we do them?
Can you tell me a little bit about Glasgow and the art scene there? I'm not that familiar, even though that's the land of my people. I've not spent a lot of time in Glasgow. I've been there a few times, but I'm more familiar with Edinburgh and Fife and the Highlands, I suppose, where my relatives live. But I mean, I've always, had a great impression of Glasgow as a center for contemporary art, with this incredibly rich design history, with the big the art school there that just keeps burning down every few years. But what's Glasgow like, for as far as being an artist there, being part of the art community there? What maybe gives it its edge, or how's it a little different than other cities or like London or whatnot? What's going on in Glasgow, Julie?
I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person to tell you about all of this, since I'm a new resident. But I think one of the things I love about it is that you don't have to be an artist to do a lot of art things. Uh, it's an extremely affordable city, which is great, and I think that's why it draws a lot of artists to stay here and to live here, which is really great, because I think it allows it allows a lot of artists to work part-time and still have time to have a healthy studio practice or other practice or to do other things. So I think that's quite nice about it. I I actually like here, in terms of my relationship or my experience with the art scene, is that I like being more distant from it. I think having lived in Toronto and working so heavily in the arts there in different galleries and with artists and stuff, and then going to Iceland and going to the art school and that being such a tight community, I'm kind of liking to see the art community almost as this um, like person in hiding. Like I kind of like that I don't know a lot of artists here yet. I have a few really, really good friends who are artists and who are brilliant artists, but I kind of like taking a backseat to it. And and I also kind of like the fact that since Glasgow isn't the largest city um, in Scotland, in the sense that I think like Edinburgh would have a lot more institutions and stuff, there's a lot less pressure to go to things. And I've always felt a big guilt of not going to openings and not going to events and launches and stuff like that. And I kind of like hear that I don't have to have that guilt because there's not as much of it.
Mm.
Like there's still definitely lots of art spaces, but I just think like to the caliber that Toronto was or something like that, I don't have the same pressures to
I'm
be involved, and I can just do my own thing.
I'm surprised to hear you say that because I've always thought of you as an artist who's like very gregarious and very really involved with the people that are around you in the art community. Like here in Guelph, you were in Toronto. You know, you're working with MKG Gallery and really close with
Yeah.
people there. And then you always seem to find your people. And I've always thought that's awesome. Like you're really, you know, you're like hardcore about being an artist and like living that. But a big part of that is like having this great community around you all the time. How do you think about that as far as how you're an individual, I suppose, like in these different communities around the world? Like, you know, what kind of value are you getting out of the people that you're around? Or how do you think about negotiating your relationship as like working with them? Do you have any thoughts about that? I know it's a big question, but I'm just curious how you have like a really open heart about people
Yeah.
and what that's about to you.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I'm quite used to having the majority of people I'm close to, and I think especially at least in Glasgow, I have some really wonderful friends and a great community here. But actually, for the first time in my life, I think many of my closest friends aren't actively practicing artists. Like in Iceland, most of my friends were in the program with me or within the art scene, and same with Toronto. But it's actually kind of nice to shut off your artist brain more and more. And I think it's made me like a more balanced human since then. Um, but it's really nice to kind of be able to keep in touch. And since I'm so used to it, like actually this whole lockdown thing in terms of like art community, I don't think it's changed too much for me. Like I'll still call my friends and we'll Skype or we'll chat or something. But um, I think I think from moving, like especially my move from Toronto to Iceland, um, I really realized that you don't need proximity to be close to people. Of course, it helps, and in many ways, and it makes it easier and potentially better. But I think that idea that you have to physically be there or be present, I think for a long time now, I've realized isn't always true. Um, and sometimes, kind of the relationships you can maintain through distance are the ones that are actually the ones that matter.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so I think it's been kind of like that for me for a while now. So it's just, I don't know if it's really changed too much.
Right. I mean, you've been like for 10 years or so, you've been very nomadic and kind of following the wind where you feel like it should take you to find new communities. Um, I mean, what is the source of that wind? Like how like what by you know really embedding yourself in communities outside of Canada, like what I guess are you finding there? What is perhaps more interesting, or how is that changing the way you thought, you know, before you left, while you're up until you graduated from Guelph? What are you finding in these new international communities of artists?
Um, I think I learned that I had a very naive way, and I think in many ways I likely still do, way of seeing art in my little kind of Toronto bubble I had for a while. So I think it's really opened up my eyes of the different ways that art can happen, the different ways that people choose to practice, the ways that people choose to engage with or not engage with art. I think that's really, like, my eyes have really been open to that over the years. But I think it's made me not scared to try stuff. Like I think that's been one of the biggest things I've learned over the last 10 years. It's like it just doesn't, it's still scary, and I'm still scared many of the times, but it doesn't mean it has to stop you. And also that nothing is really permanent, or very few things are permanent, that like you'll always find a way. Like I mean, you and I think we've actually spent more time together out of Canada than we've spent in Canada.
I think so, yeah.
So it's things like that. Like you can have a friend based in Toronto or in Canada somewhere, but I think one of the beauties of art is that it is so international. So if anything, it helps you share these communities, that I can, invite like Canadian artists to Glasgow, and we can do a project, or we can do a project in Greece, or, somewhere else. And I just think it's really kind of seeing these barriers as bridges instead. It's understanding that, like, I don't know, that space isn't really all that much, and distance also isn't all that much all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and on that idea with about space, distance, time, all these little topics, they're so easy to wrap your mind around. I mean, that those things have all radically altered in this sort of isolated global pandemic. I mean, for you, you kind of made this decision to stay in Glasgow, not come back to Toronto, and I totally understand that. And but what do you think? I mean, people have had time in the last 2 or 3 months, I think, to really reflect on a lot of things. But as far as for you, what reflections are you having about what you're doing, or and maybe more particular about like what the art world is, what how this is changing how we think about art, and then also, and maybe like what might be lost out of this, or what might be gained. Like, do you have any ideas that are kind of fresh from just the current situation?
Yeah, I mean, I hope the conversation of accessibility will come up a lot more, um, and be thought about in a more sustainable way, because I think it's always been a problem in art. Accessibility, whether that's like physical proximity or ability to enter or access a space for whatever reason, but also financial accessibility in terms of seeing, like, large institutions with really high ticket sales or something like that. I think um, it was like the largest institutions that were the first ones to want to go virtual to be relevant. At least that's how I understand it or see it. So um, I hope that accessibility, or offering alternative accessibility, maybe, I hope that stays. I think it'll be hard to have everything go back as usual, just because of everything going on. Like, there's just so many factors to consider, whether that's finances for artists and art workers and art spaces, but also safety and everything. So I think it'll be quite difficult to travel, because I mean, as much as I was saying that proximity and distance and all of this stuff doesn't matter, I also know, and from my own experience, like like travel is really important in the arts and for getting arts around. And I mean, that as well from all of your traveling with that video and everything. But even just doing residencies, and even me in my little Glasgow bubble, I end up having to, or not having, getting to go and do a lot of really great things in many places to kind of broaden these communities, and to make them grow, and also make them feel more intimate at the same time. So um, I think that'll be one of the biggest challenges, is how to not lose all of that. But I think maybe a good thing that could come from that would be that maybe more institutions might look more locally, uh, with all of these, like, uncertainties with how travel and people moving around will be. Like, I just really hope that some institutions will get excited again about people who kind of live in their backyard rather than always wanting someone international too. Because I think a lot of people also do want to show where they live and don't always get to anymore, and have this feeling, and like myself as well, feeling like you have to leave in order to be anything or to be seen, or you're so much more exciting being an international artist than a local artist. So maybe those conversations can open up a bit more about how to support more locally, in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, I think you're really mirroring my thoughts about it too. As we both uh, traveled quite a lot for art in the past, and really wondering, how will that continue in the future? Should it continue? If it does, what it'll look like? Because amazing thing about art is this sort of idea of it, that it's like this universal thing that's, like, in a sense, is sort of like beyond countries, beyond cultures, beyond language, beyond. It's about, like, universal ideas a lot of the time, and those can also, like, create empathy between people as well. And that to me is always, like, the exciting thing about it, is I want to see visual expressions or whatever from other places that are, like, radically different and can make me think about being a human different, I suppose. But yeah, I think that can still happen, as you're saying, with, like, different ways of thinking about it accessibly, thinking about your own community different and whatnot. Certainly, it's kind of changing a lot of my ideas about that, and I think it's making me softer too. Is a little bit of it, which is probably a good thing. Do you have any, like, kind of, like, hopes about it? I mean, you touched on it there, but do you have any hopes about, like, what I don't know, I guess for yourself or for others, like, what you think you might want to see come out of it?
Um, I know that it would work in a different capacity and different way for everyone, but I just hope that it it lets people take more breaks. And I know, like, obviously this pandemic, it's really becoming a big financial issue for many people and not allowing that. But I think to be okay with not doing stuff, it's taken me a while and I'm still learning how to do that. But um, like I remember when everything was kind of coming to be really global when was that, like early mid March, and so many people were so quick to be on Zoom and to make everything digital right away, instead of just, like, taking a step back and breathing and then coming back. And I know it works differently for everyone, and maybe now the people who were really active are suddenly taking a break and vice versa. But I hope that people take more time to not do things.
Ooh, you're really ripping my heart out and throwing it in the bird feeder, because I feel like this is exactly my thoughts, more better expressed than any other guests, I think. Because I feel like the tragedy is sort of this idea that uh, you know uh, it kind of flies in the face of the rhetoric that artists are good at speaking about how essential we are and how vital we are in society. But, even just for a few weeks or months, it's sort of like, actually, right now, it's fine. There's a huge back catalog of arts and culture we can draw on. And I'm guilty of that. Like, I jumped into doing this web show. I was like, this is not going to stop us. And, artists love a challenge. We work with what we got or whatever. But, I actually have incredible moral dilemmas about doing this, because I'm like, is it important to make more content in these weeks, or maybe is it okay? And I feel like a lot of artists are having this sort of potentially like a crisis, where it's like, well, maybe I don't have to be useful right now at this very moment. So to hear you say that, I think it's very wise to understand, like, I guess your role in society,
Yeah.
with what you do, and how it works. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today and share your work. It's really good to catch up, even if this wasn't live on YouTube. It'd be a fun thing to do and talk about these ideas a little more in depth. As sometimes we're setting up an exhibition, it's all about the exact dynamics of it. I forgot to show these before we get going. I have a bag that you generously gifted of these Play-Doh rock climbing rock holds that we showed in Greece. I've still got them. They're still in good shape. Yeah, so thinking, last time I saw you were thinking about how to attach these to walls, and now today we're speaking about the kind of the ideas around your work and objects and
Yeah.
what's going on in the world. So, yeah. So thank you so much, Julie. I hope you take care.
You as well.
Yeah, I hope you're doing well, all things considered, staying as productive as you feel like you need to, and just kind of savoring each day for what it is and what's possible. So, looking forward to seeing you in real life again when that's possible, either here or maybe in Scotland. Who knows, or somewhere else.
Yeah. Or somewhere else.
Okay, well, take care, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Yeah, talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, that was a great interview with Julie Foronda, who's joining us from where she's currently at in Glasgow, Scotland, talking about her different experiences in art, the different things that she's made, and sort of more importantly, how she thinks about them. We hope everyone enjoyed hearing that conversation, either live or if you're watching later on Ed Video Guelph's YouTube channel, where that video will be archived forever until the next global pandemic and the electrical systems and the internet goes down, and then it's just like a dusty memory for some people who watched it. How are you doing, Edie?
I'm good.
You're doing. I'm good. I'm good. We're just about to wrap up this show.
5 likes.
5 likes. That's really good. I like that. We're gonna sign off now. Thanks for your video game review. Tomorrow we're back with Dustin Seabrook, who's joining us to talk about his Project Isolation series of videos. And then Wednesday, Corey Steckel will be here talking about all the things that he does and his collage work in particular. Then next week we're moving to a Tuesday and Thursday format, taking Julie's wise advice. Don't speed off into the future during this time. It's a time to slow down maybe and think a little more deeply about what's going on. Thanks to those who were watching today, to Liz and Jen and others. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Are you ready to play us out, Edie?
Yes.
All right. Thanks again to Julie Foronda and Ed Video sponsors Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Guelph. We couldn't do it without all of these people working together. See you tomorrow at 2 p.m.